In this video, I'm going to talk about how to dial in your split squat and lunge variations to get the most out of them. So before we talk about the specific cues and how to dial in your lunges and split squats, let's talk about why that matters. So the first thing is that lunges and split squats are variations of gait. Gait are things like running, rucking, sprinting, and most of the athletic movements that you do tens of thousands of reps of every single day. So how well you do those things, your posture, the quality of your movement dictates how efficient you are and how well you're going to tolerate large amounts of training load over time. So if you do your lunges and split squats well, reinforcing really good posture, force production strategies, and movement, that's going to help you get the most out of your training so that you can handle larger amounts of running and rucking volume, be more efficient during those movements, and ultimately just get more fit. So the first thing you want to think about when dialing in your lunges and split squats is looking at yourself from the side. So if you don't have somebody to give you feedback on this, record yourself to see if your position is where it needs to be. The first thing you want to think about is your head, your ribs, and your hips, and imagine those things as three bowls, and you want those bowls to be stacked on top of each other. So you want your head to be stacked right on top of your ribs, on top of your hips. The next thing you want to look at is the orientation of those things. So if your hips are tilted forward like that, imagine that bowl is full of water. If the water is going to spill out, that's a bad position. Same thing for your ribs. If you're tilted back like this, the water would spill out the back, and the head is the same thing whether you're looking up or down. So you want all of those bowls, A, stacked on top of each other, and B, in an orientation where water would not spill out of them. Now your hips can be a little bit tilted forward, but think like 10 degrees, not a huge tilt where your back is arched and your ribs are popping up. So that's the first thing we want to focus on. And then the second thing we want to look at to help with that is drawing a straight line from your ear to your knee. So if these three things are stacked, your head, your ribs, and your hips, then you'll have a straight line from your knee, your hip, through your rib cage, all the way up to your ear, and you'll be stacked perfectly. That will help dictate how big of a step you take. So if you're doing a lunge variation, if you take too big of a step, the knee ends behind the hip. If you take too small of a step, the knee ends in front of the hip. If you're doing a split squat, same thing. You want to be just that right distance, so as you drop down, you keep that nice vertical line. All three bowls are stacked on top of each other. So let's talk about what you want to avoid when looking at your lunges or split squats from the side. First thing, look at your head. You don't want to be looking up, you don't want to be looking down, you also don't want your head to drift forward even if you're looking straight ahead. The second thing is you want to avoid leaning forward with your upper body. Even if you have a nice orientation with your head and your rib cage, you want to avoid that forward lean, you want to stay vertical. The third thing is looking at what's happening with your ribs and your hips. So you could be stacked, but if you arch where your hips are tilting forward and your rib cage is tilting backwards, you'll feel a lot of pressure, you'll see a big curve in your lower back, and you'll see those ribs popping forward. And then the last thing you want to look at is your stride length. So if you understride, your knee will tuck under, your hips will tuck like this, and you won't be in a straight line from your ear to your knee. If you're overstriding, your knee ends up behind your hip, and that tends to lead to that lower back arch and those ribs popping up. So those are the things you want to avoid. So the next angle you want to look at is from straight on. So again, you want to record yourself or have someone else watch you do these. It is impossible to see what's happening with the orientation, because as soon as you start to look down to see what's happening in your lower body, then you're throwing off everything from that side perspective. So as you drop down, the first thing we want to look at is what's happening with your hips. You want these guys to stay relatively level. You just don't want to see any extreme tilt occurring as you drop down. So you should stay fairly level as you're moving up and down. The next thing is what's happening with your femurs and your hips. You want these guys to imagine their headlights pointed straight ahead where you're moving. So both your forward leg and your back leg and your hips, imagine them as having headlights on them, and they should be parallel with each other, pointed straight ahead. So as you drop down, these guys are staying in line, again, pointed straight ahead. Where you'll start to see this fall apart, the back leg could point out, the forward leg could cave in. These guys, your femurs could stay in a straight line, but your hips could rotate out to the side or rotate in. Oftentimes this will change from leg to leg. So again, you want to focus on keeping all of these things in line with each other. A little bit of variation from rep to rep is fine. If you're seeing a little bit of movement throughout the range, not a big deal. You just want to avoid the extremes, where one is pointed in a very different direction than the other, or your hips are constantly stuck in one direction or the other. So the best cue to keep your hips and femurs in a straight line ahead is that headlight cue, where you want to imagine you have headlights on them, you want them pointed straight ahead the entire time. If you record yourself, you're getting feedback and you notice one leg's going out to the side, or one hip is rotated in or out the entire time on one side. Again, the same thing, the headlight cue can be helpful. Putting your hands on your hips is actually helpful for getting that orientation. You'll actually notice like, oh yeah, my hips are pointed in this direction, they're pointed in that direction. If they're in line with my hips, again, if you feel your foot rotating out or your knee is rotating out on the trailing leg, think of rotating it in. Again, that hips, the headlights, is the best cue to help keep that orientation. The other thing to keep in mind is load and how quickly you're moving. As load progresses, oftentimes that's when movement will break down. So you might be able to demonstrate really good control, perfect range of motion, nothing breaking down. And as you add more and more load, or you really speed it up, things will start going wonky and break down. So the first thing you should do is slow it down. If you still aren't able to maintain control, you need to reduce load. And then from there, if you've reduced load and you still can't demonstrate them well, you're getting something wonky going on, that's when you need to limit the range of motion. So it could be setting a block under here, a plate, anything, until right to that point where your hips start to bail out, you start doing something wonky. Again, it's better to do things well at the range of motion that you can and slowly extend that than it is to compensate doing a full range of motion. So the last thing that we want to look at is what's happening at your foot and your knee. So as you drop down, you want to think of your big toe, your little toe, and your heel as a tripod. You want to have an even distribution on those 3 points. Now, obviously, you're going to see some oscillation. Your knee might roll in a little bit, you might roll out a little bit, so you can feel that weight shift around a little bit. You don't need to be a robot. You don't need to be super stiff and stuck on those 3 points the entire time, but you don't want to see those extremes where you're way up on your toes, you're rolling to the outside of your foot's way caved in like this, and you have no pressure on your pinky. So a good cue to help you do this is to think of smashing your big toe into the floor, or imagining there's like a $100 bill. Like if you're rolling to your toes and you're losing pressure on your heel, if you're rolling to the outside, you're losing your big toe. Imagine there's a $100 bill there, someone's trying to pull it out, and you want to keep pressure on that the entire time. That will help keep you from going to those extremes, a little bit of motion being okay. So the last thing we want to consider is what's happening with your knee relative to your front leg. You can be in a perfectly stacked line from the side, femurs in line with the hips, everything pointed straight ahead, but you can have quite a bit of variability with what's happening at the knee relative to the foot. You can have everything from a vertical shin to that knee being way over the toes. As long as you're maintaining that tripod foot, you're not losing pressure with the heel or with the toes, it's okay to explore that range of motion. Like anything, you want to own the easiest position first, which tends to mean a little bit of translation over the toes, not staying vertical, and also not driving that knee as far over the toes as possible. And once you own that, you can start to play around with moving across that continuum. As that knee drives further over the toes, it tends to put a little bit more stress on the knee, not in a bad way. We want to be able to tolerate that in time. And as you keep a little bit more vertical shin, it tends to translate a little bit more load on that back leg because you can't keep all the weight on the forward leg, so you're gonna have to propel yourself with the back leg a little bit more, and it tends to shift a little bit more load to the butt and hamstring, and as the knee goes forward, you get a little bit more in the quad. Again, none of these being better than the other, you just wanna be able to own that continuum. So the strategies that we covered in this video are for our fundamental or our most rudimentary split squat and lunge variations. There are more advanced variations that will contradict some of the things we covered here. That's okay. You need to be able to do these types of lunges and split squats first before you move into some of those more advanced variations. So another important concept to keep in mind is that some variation from rep to rep is a good thing. It's even desirable, as long as you're generally falling within the constraints that we talked about throughout this video and not falling into those extreme compensations, then you're fine. And a related concept to that is not creating too much tension. As you do lunges, you want to think of them as living somewhere in the middle of the continuum. Walking being you're creating the least amount of tension necessary to propel yourself forward, and a max effort deadlift being at the other extreme end of the range. For these lunges, you want to create only as much tension as you need to have a nice full range of motion, to hit all the cues that we talk about, and to perform these very, very well. You don't want to create any more tension than is necessary. The goal here is to create efficiency and improve our posture and our movement and force production strategies. That does not mean going max effort on every single rep. So to summarize our cues, to recap them, first thing we want to do is look at from the side. We want to be stacked from our ear all the way to our knee, thinking of our head, our rib cage, and our hips as bowls. We want those in the same basic orientation, stacked on top of each other. The second cue that we want to think about is looking at ourselves from the front, keeping our femurs in line with each other, in line with our hips, pointed straight ahead like headlights, and not letting our hips have any kind of crazy tilt from side to side. A little bit of variation on both of those things being okay. The last thing we want to look at is what's happening with our foot. We want to have a tripod foot, big toe, little toe, heel, nice even distribution between all 3 points throughout the entire range of motion, and letting that knee move a little bit over the foot, not at the extreme, keeping a vertical shin or going way over the toes, owning somewhere in the middle first, and then slowly exploring that entire range of motion.